Welcome back. You're watching Nation Tonight. Vladimir Putin has no competition, or at least that's what his critics say today. In what came as a shock for the world today, jailed Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny has been declared dead by the prison service of the Yamalo-Nenets region, where he had been serving his sentence. In a statement published on its website, the Federal Penitentiary Service stated that Navalny felt unwell after a walk and almost immediately lost consciousness. They also added that medical staff failed to resuscitate Navalny even as the reason of his death was being established. Now, the curious case of Alexei Navalny, Russia's most prominent opposition leader and a vociferous Putin critic, has been nothing less than a Bollywood film plot. He was sentenced to 19 more years in prison by a Russian court in August last year on an extremism conviction. Navalny had been behind bars in Russia since January 2021, when he returned to Moscow after recuperating in Germany from nerve agent poisoning that he blamed on the Kremlin. Before his arrest, he campaigned against official corruption and organized major anti-Kremlin protests. His prison term kept extending, even as he kept rejecting all charges against him as politically motivated. Let's listen into some of the reactions that came in today after his death was announced.
Щойно стало відомо, що зараз сказав Олаф, пане канцлер, стало відомо, що в російській тюрмі загинув Олексій Навальний. Очевидно, він убитий Путіним, як і тисячі інших закатованих, замучених через одну цю істоту. Путіну все одно, хто загине, аби тільки він зберіг свої позиції. І саме тому він не має зберегти нічого. Путін все повинен програти, все повинен втратити і відповідати за скоєне.
Россия, я не знаю, мне просто, у меня слов нет, а пока ничего и сказать не могу. Я просто потрясен этой новостью, извините.
All right, to talk more about this mysterious death and the case of Alexei Navalny on the broadcast, I'm joined by Tatiana Kokhareva. She's a senior journalist from Moscow. I'm also joined by Dr. Swasti Ra, Associate Fellow at the MPIDSA. Good evening and namaskar. Thank you very much to both of you for joining us on the broadcast. Tatiana, I'd like to start with you. What's the general sense today in Russia after this announcement? Here's a man who's been known as the fiercest Putin critic, opponent of Vladimir Putin. He was also likened to leaders like Nelson Mandela by his supporters. What's the general sense, the general sentiment among people today?
Good evening, Shreya. Well, I would say that, likening Alexei Navalny to Nelson Mandela is a stretch, and it's a stretch way too far. He was certainly one of the loudest critics, that's for sure, because for the last years that he spent out of prison, he was mainly a vlogger. You couldn't call him a politician because he already had a criminal conviction. That means that he couldn't possibly and potentially in any way, in any world, in any country, participate in any real political activity. So, this is, as per usual, anything pertaining to his case is massively blown out of proportion outside of Russia. And for now, we received the news of his death. There's at least 2 commissions that have been charged with investigating the circumstances. And I dare to say that this is that.
Tatiana, it's interesting that you say it's blown out of proportion every time we talk about Alexei Navalny, but over the years we've seen how he's been attacked, and he's just one of the many cases that have emerged out of Russia who's been a vocal opponent of President Putin. There are several other examples as well in the past who've been either jailed or exiled, or worst case scenario, they've been killed.
Well, look, I do believe that I understand what you're hinting at when you're saying that, talking about the opponents that have been killed. But then again, there's a very different perspective to this when it comes to, you know, like even if you look at the reaction today worldwide, you know, it took minutes, literally minutes for everybody to speak out on the matter. His wife is, by coincidence, obviously, in Germany at a security summit where she literally has nothing to do with security. She's not an expert. You know, so she's being used as this kind of, you know, this figure, literally to kind of, you know, to prop up some sort of an idea. And I dare say that the relatives and those that you talk about, you know, the fiercest critics, that, as you call them, they literally are right now in Munich, propped up there to talk about, you know, just how much of an evil state Russia is. Can we say that this is, you know, can we literally talk about anything else rather than a death right now that we don't even know the cause of death yet? And yet it took minutes for everybody who is interested in demonizing Russia to speak out on the matter. Is that a coincidence? You know, it's hard to believe that.
It's not a coincidence, Tatiana, but clearly it's certainly very making us, all of us, a lot more curious about this case. And you know,
Why?
nobody
Why though?
here wants
Shreya,
to demonize Russia, but we just want to delve into this case. You know, we just want to delve into this case, deep dive into what has been happening. But let me take this across to my other panelist, Dr. Swasti Ra, who's been waiting patiently on the broadcast. Dr. Swasti Ra, what do you make of this death? What do you think should be made of this death?
A very good evening to you, Shreya. Good evening to the Russian guest on the panel today as well. See, what do I make of it? Obviously, this is something which has not gone down well. The manner of his death, the fact that he was absolutely alive and kicking and smiling a few days ago, and all of a sudden he fell so sick that he actually died, and there has been no confirmation as such. President Putin has been informed. Obviously, these are things, there are uncanny details that do not match up, and I would say the same. Having said that, let's also face the fact that this is not the first time it has happened in Russia. In the primer that you began with, when you started the segment, you also mentioned similar situations coming, at different points in time when a lot of critics and opponents have mysteriously disappeared or silenced. So this has been happening. But apart from the conspiracy theories, because these kind of situations are also extremely fertile grounds for a lot of conspiracy theories, I would, steer clear of the conspiracy theories, and I would just say one thing, that yes, it happens at a time when Russia is, geared up for elections, and yes, in many ways, to many other democracies across the world, and India being one. Such kind of things do refer to or do highlight the kind of subverted democratic institutions and democratic traditions that Russia seems to be suffering from. And ideally, we would expect that strong measures would be taken to let critics and opposition leaders also have their voice, in the Russian mainstream. And because Alexei Navalny was extremely popular, I'm sure you may have heard of him so many times. He actually came back to Russia at a time when he had a choice to go on living in Germany. All this speaks volumes of the fact that he also had, political ambitions, and he was, Tatiana said it correctly, that he really had this anti-corruption forum, and he was known as an anti-corruption activist. But at the same time, let's face it, that he was extremely popular. And when he was allowed to run for the mayor, he was allowed to run for the election of a mayor, he actually got the second highest vote. So this does show that there was a sizable population within Russia that really expected a kind of a political variety that he was capable of offering. So his death is obviously coming in many ways as a subversion of that democratic tradition in Russia. And I think my final point here would be that this also marks I mean, this comes at a time when Russia's relations with the West are an all-time low, and this would be a further blow to that because every single leader that I have heard when he's been or she has been talking about Navalny's death have said the same kind of things again and again. And even though I would say that I would wait for some sort of an official confirmation and official investigation to actually come out with some sort of a concluding opinion on what really happened to him, I would still say that this is, in the longer run, not healthy for the Russian society.
Okay. Tatiana, you want
Back
to
to you.
respond to what Dr. Rao said?
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, let's set the record straight. The mayoral election that you're talking about as a serious, kind of evidence of his popularity, first of all, it happened 11 years ago. Yes, so we're clear on that. This was in 2013, and although he came in second, he only amassed 20% of the vote, or 21%, but it was, it was not even 30%. So it's not, yes, technically it is second, but the numbers are just so drastically different because the leading candidate actually won by 60%. So, when we talk about him being popular, we need to put things into context. We're talking about something that happened over a decade ago. That's for one thing. The second thing is that you're very correct about mentioning the election. So if we look at it from this perspective, this is probably the most disadvantageous moment for him to die from the standpoint of the Russian authorities and of Vladimir Putin, because whatever happens, God forbid anything happened to him, it always ends up the same way. There's this frenzy of, of comments, of really, really nasty comments coming in from the West. So this is anytime anything happened to Navalny, this was used as a pretext to demonize Russia, to demonize Vladimir Putin himself. So to think that he would be in any way, shape or form interested or invested in what happened today, it just doesn't add up. It's not logical.
Tatiana, give me an answer to this simple question of mine. Who are the opponents of Vladimir Putin? What are the opposition parties in Russia?
Look, we are at war right now, as you might be well aware. And when a country is at war, you unite again, behind your leader. This is simple as that. Right now, when the country is in a conflict, it would be very, very, very bad situation to have an opponent. And if you look at any country that's in a state of active conflict right now, you will see the same picture. The country unites behind the leader. That's one thing. And the second thing, you have a prime minister who's won and who's facing an election. And, he's also been in power for quite a long time. Would you ask the same question?
That doesn't answer my question, Tatiana. I'm afraid that doesn't answer my question. Yes, Dr. Swasti, I will give you time to respond. But Tatiana, that equating our prime minister with the president of Russia doesn't answer my question. I had asked something completely different from you. And our elections are completely different. We still have opposition parties. We still have a verbal war of words every day that we journalists discuss and debate in our studios between the ruling government, the ruling political party and the opposition parties. So democracy is thriving here quite successfully, and it's quite unfair for you to actually compare the Prime Minister and our elections right now. But Dr. Swasti Rao, go ahead.
Yeah, so to your question more directly, Shreya, yes, you have to understand that President Putin has been in power for the last 23 years in Russia, okay? So when he was not president, he was the prime minister. And when then he brought about some certain changes in the Russian constitution that allowed him to go on being president practically for life. So if he goes on winning the elections, he could be practically president for life. And like I said, that he's already been in Russia for 23 years. And to your question about what is the state of opposition, there is something called a Russian Opposition Coordination Council. And this came about at the time when Alexei Navalny was becoming very popular. So this was put together in 2012. And the reason for putting something like this together was because the opposition in Russia was very fragmented and fragmented, and to sort of put that together on one platform was the idea behind putting together this kind of a Russian Opposition Coordination Council. But having said that, I think it's for the world to see that opposition doesn't really thrive in Russia. The critics and opponents, etc., they are charged with the embezzlement. Sometimes the secret police plays a role, even if there are times when certain charges are proved, and then it is very difficult to actually hold people accountable, because more often than not, those are perhaps contract killers. So what I'm trying to say is that there is a serious problem of institutions being subverted in Russia, which is not healthy for the Russian society in the long run. Now, is it directly related with President Putin? Like I said, that I would rather wait for some sort of a confirmation instead of giving into the conspiracy theories around. So on that, I would be reticent, and I would actually be patient and wait. Just the other thing about Tatiana saying about our Prime Minister, I think she needs to know that our Prime Minister is the product of India's democratic tradition. I mean, he's somebody who used to be a tea seller and who made it big and made it to being India's Prime Minister only because India believes in a thriving democratic culture. So I think that it is extremely unfortunate to sort of compare these two things. Despite that, India and Russia ties are strong. Doesn't mean that there are problems within Russia that we here in India would not discuss the way we are doing right now. And like I said, what I am following more keenly is that how would this now be taken up, as a point of tension, of an added point of tension between West and Russia. Because if you know that, just a couple of days ago, there was also some news coming from the US where they accused Russia of militarizing space, and then this entire controversy around Navalny's death, which I think his wife is still not sure is confirmed or not. But despite that, this is a sad state of affairs. And like I said, that I would believe that in the longer run, allowing for dissenting voices to exist is in the best interest of the Russian people as well.
Okay.
Back to you,
all right,
Shreya.
we'll leave it there. We'll have to, of course, wait for the official confirmation and the reasons behind Navalny's death. Tatiana and Dr. Swasti Ra, thank you very much to both you ladies for joining us on Nation Tonight and sharing your thoughts on this death of Alexei Navalny.
You're welcome.